It's just like it wasn't.
All the Mexican.
Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Yevamos daf Pei Gimel, and we're starting halfway down on Pei Beis Amud Beis. We'll be starting now a sugya, really continuing from the Mishnah about androgynous. Just a scientific overview that an androgynous is someone who is born with both male and female reproductive organs, and that of course poses a shaila. Whereas the world around us may have different pshatim in what genders, we don't have any lack of clarity. Men are men, women are women. But if there is a person who's born with both genders, so what do we do about that? Our Mishnah says, Tanan androgynous no say that he's allowed to marry, and that implies even lechatchila. Says the Gemara, maybe we should change the language. Tani no im nasa, only if he married, that an androgynous could marry a woman. Says the Gemara, it's only b'diavad. I v'ha no say tani. Okay, but tachlis, the word doesn't say what you say. It says no say, which implies that one is allowed to marry a woman lechatchila if they're an androgynous. Well, the Tamech says the Gemara, what about a little bit later in our Mishnah? My aval lo nisa, that they can't be proposed to by a man. So obviously that is not allowed. So it says the Gemara, Elamai Nisa Diavad, no say Nami Diavad. Both of them in this case should be B'diavad. Says the Gemara, Amri, that's not correct. Really, lo, no says Lechatchila Mashma, Avalon Nisa Diavad Nami lo. That seems to be that in the Resha, where we say that an androgynous, a person who has both sets of reproductive organs, that they're allowed to marry a woman, that's Lechatchila. And it seems to be that for a man to try and marry an androgynous, treating her in the role of a female, that is not the case, and that would be even b'diavad namila. Says the Gemara, I want to make sure I understand all the shitas here, and the Gemara asks as follows: 5 lines from the bottom on Pei Beis Amud Beis. Rabbi Eliezer Omer androgynous chayav and alav skila kizachar. Rabbi Eliezer seems to be very clear in the Seif of our Mishnah that if one were to have tashmish amita with an androgynous, that he would be chayav skila kizachar. Would be chayav skila if a man sleeps with an androgynous, because remember he has both reproductive organs. So if they have tashmish amita derech nakvus, and we'll get into some of the details today about what all of this is talking about. So Rabbi Eliezer says that person is chayav skila, meaning we have an understanding that an androgynous is a man. Bechlal, what does that imply about the Tanakama? Bechlal, the Tanakama sfuke misafkale, that our Tanakama, who says that androgynous no say, it seems to be that he's not sure. So how could you say that they should get married? How can the Tanakama say that they get married if in fact there's an element of doubt? So says the Gemara, there really is no doubt. Bein lemar, both according to the Tanakama and according to Rabbi Eliezer, mishpat, pshita le, everybody knows that an androgynous is considered to be like a zachar. Ika beinayu skila mishnei mekomos. The machlokes here is about tashmish amita in 2 different parts of the body. And the Gemara is going to detail this a little bit later, but just to clarify right now, that for a man to be intimate with an androgynous, there are 2 options. One is the tzad nakvus, the female reproductive organs that the androgynous possesses, and the other is bia shelo kedarka, which is tashmish amita me'achora. So those are the 2 options. So that's where this machlokes comes out between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. The Mar Savar chayav alav skila mishnei mekomos. According to the Tanakama, we're of the opinion that if a man were to be intimate with an androgynous b'tzad nakvus, with the female reproductive organs, or shelo kedarka, they'd be chayav skila. Umar Savar Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion, no, that it's only kizachar, only tashmish amita shelo kedarka. But if a man were to be intimate with an androgynous b'tzad nakvus, with the female reproductive organs, that would not be a chayav skila. It's usher, but it would not be a chayav skila. Now let's try and see.
Wasn't Tanakama the one that said they can get married?
So it's this Gemara is what? Okay. So the Gemara at the very bottom, last 2 words on Pei Beis Amud Beis says, Amar Rav. Rav says, Leisa lemas nisin mekame brisa. We need to reject our Mishnah because of a brisa. What did our Mishnah say? So Rashi helps us to fill in the gaps. Rashi on the top of the page, Dibur hamaschal leisa lemas nisin, dektani the Rabbi Yossi androgynous machelis ishto betruma. That's where we started our sugya. That when an androgynous is married to a woman, that she is allowed to eat truma. But what is the brisa that seems to conflict with our Mishnah? That is a brisa that also quotes Rabbi Yossi. Titania Rabbi Yossi Omer androgynous beria bifnei atzmahu v'lo hichriu bo chachamim im zachar im nekeva. That's a mic drop of lack of clarity. We paskin that we don't know. We don't know what an androgynous is. So now we have 2 versions of Rabbi Yossi. We have Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah who indicates that if an androgynous would be married to a woman, she'd be allowed to eat truma if the androgynous was a Kohen. And then we have this second version of Rabbi Yossi that seems to indicate that we have no idea what an androgynous is. So what does the top line say on our page? Our Mishnah has to fall to the Brisa. Now, normally in Psak, we don't do that. Normally, a Mishnah is more powerful than a Brisa. Why over here are we doing this? Because the Gemara says about the Brisa that we have this Rabbi Yossi that seems to be that there's a lack of clarity. Asks the Gemara, Adirabba, that's nice that you brought a Brisa, but when it comes to Psak, Mishnayos should win. Adirabba, fourth line, Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, Leisa le Brisa Mekami Mos Nisan. We should have undone the Brisa and supported what the Mishnah said, namely, we should support our Mishnah that says that androgynous can be machilas ishto b'truma, and rejected the Brisa, which indicates that Rabbi Yossi was unclear, and to use his language, says the Gemara, it's a great idea. However, we see a deviation from our Mishnah to the Brisa. In our Mishnah, really, Rabbi Yossi was quoted alongside Reb Shimon. If you look back, you'll see it says Rabbi Yossi and Reb Shimon that they both hold. Says the Gemara, Mideshavke Rabbi Yossi lebarzuge. Because in the Brisa we see that Rabbi Yossi left his partner in crime. He left Reb Shimon alone. Therefore, Shma mina hadarbe, that Rabbi Yossi must have changed his mind, and therefore it must therefore be that the second version of Rabbi Yossi is correct, and therefore our Mishnah is wrong, and we follow the Brisa. But all of that is according to Rav. What is Rav Paskin? According to Rav, our Mishnah is wrong. And really, when it comes to androgynous, we paskin halacha l'maisa that lo hichriu bo chachamim. We don't know. That's how we paskin. That's how Rav understands our sugya. However, 6 lines down, Shmuel Amar no, leisa lebraisa mekame mas nisan. Really, the brisa, which indicates that we don't know what an androgynous is, that's what we reject. And really, the Mishnah is correct that the Mishnah treats the androgynous as a zachar l'chol hadeos. Says the Gemara, why? Adirabba leisa lemas nisan mekame brisa tashamina le the Shmuel dechayish leyichidah. We know that there are some shitas in the Tanaim where sometimes they always side with the singular machmir shita. So says the Gemara, Shmuel was like that also. And if that's true, then why wouldn't we say that the brisa of Rabbi Yossi is stronger than our Mishnah? After all, if Shmuel is going to hold of a das yachid, he should hold of Rabbi Yossi, who holds of as to what an androgynous is. And if we don't know what an androgynous is, then how can you say, like our Mishnah, how can you say that she's allowed to eat the truma when she's married to an androgynous? So says the Gemara, Hani Mili, when do we say that Shmuel is chayish lechida? That's ki lo misakra masnisin. But aval ki misakra masnisin lo chayish. So Shmuel is very principled about his ideas of when he holds of a das yachid. Shmuel agrees to hold of a das yachid, a shita that's machmir, in a brisa, provided that it doesn't conflict with a Mishnah. But when there is a Mishnah, then even Shmuel's house policy that I always hold like the machmir das yachid doesn't apply. The Mishnah is more powerful. So what that means is that we have a huge fundamental machlokas in regards to androgynous between Rav and Shmuel. Rav is of the opinion that lemaisa, we don't know what an androgynous is. We have no idea, and therefore no kulas. We have to do machmir and mekil everywhere, on all, cutting across all different halachos. We have to treat an androgynous as a pure suffix. Masha'en kain, Shmuel is that's correct. Masha'en kain, Shmuel will side like our Mishnah that an androgynous is a zachar l'chol davar. Huge difference of opinions between the two, huge halachic implications as well, because if we in fact hold that an androgynous is a pure suffix, they can never marry. However, if we hold that an androgynous is a zachar, then he can marry a woman. And our Mishnah says she gets truma if he's a kohen. Huge nafkaminas l'maisa. I don't know if androgyny is common. I don't know what the statistics are. I'm sure if it happens, it's exceedingly, exceedingly, exceedingly rare. Maybe a handful in the world, I would imagine. I don't know. The other case, tumtum, is more common. We're going to discuss that at the end of the day today. But that is what this chasm, huge machlokas is between Rav and Shmuel as to whether or not we say an androgynous is male. That would be what Shmuel would say, or like Rav says, we just don't know. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara says a quarter of the way down on Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, Amre, Bei Rav, Mishmei de Rav, Halacha ki Rabbi Yossi be'androgynous uveharkava. Rav says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in two areas, in regards to androgynous, which is the sugya that we just learned, that he holds that we don't know what an androgynous is, and as well beharkava when it comes to grafting two different types of trees. We'll discuss what that means in a minute. Ushmuel Amar, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi bekoshi uvekiddush, that we hold like him in regards to koshi, which we're going to discuss in detail, which has to do with a woman who starts bleeding right before childbirth. And normally, had she bled during that time, she would have become a zava, but then she encountered childbirth. Do we view that as ziva blood, or do we view that as dam later? We'll discuss that case. Uvikidush, and in regards to some concerns about kiloi hakerem with grains. So let's go through all of these cases, and we're going to start with Rav. When it comes to androgynous Hada Amran, we're going to follow, Rav says we follow Rabbi Yossi, Hada Amran, that's the brisa at the top of the page, that we are of the opinion that the brisa, that Rabbi Yossi was Hadarbe from the Mishnah, the brisa is really his opinion, and Rav says that we hold like Rabbi Yossi, that lo hichriu bo chachamim in regards to androgynous. What's the case of harkava, of grafting two trees? This is common practice for botanists, for people who are making different types of fruits and oranges and apples and all the, so they'll take one apple tree and they'll graft, they'll cut it on a slight angle and they'll tape them together, however they do it, and then it grows and has different flavored fruits. Very good. So that is not so simple when the two types of foods that you're grafting are not allowed to be grafted to one another. So what's that sugya? Harkava, how do we know that Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi in regards to grafting? Ditznan, the Mishnah writes, Ein noten, you're not allowed to plant. Ve'ein mavrichin, you're not allowed to take, mavrichin, we learned about this, is where you take a branch of a tree, you run it underground and allow it to grow out of another place in the ground. So today we would have just said it's all the same tree, but the Gemara does distinguish. Ve'ein markivin, you're not allowed to graft. Erev shvis, prior to a Shemitah year, pachos mishloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah. In the 30 days leading up to Rosh Hashanah, namely in the month of Elul, you're not allowed to do Nitiya, Bricha, or Harkava. You're not allowed to do this. That's what the Tanna Kama holds. And what if you did this? If you did any of these three things, the halacha is Yaakor. Rashi over here is a third of the way down. Dibra Maschal Yaakor to Hakalta B'Shvius. Because when will it take root? It'll only take root after Rosh Hashanah. The Ein Harkava Koletes B'Pachos Mishloshim Yom. The Tanna Kama here in this Mishnah about Harkava is of the opinion that the rooting of these three things, of Natiya, of Havracha, and of, what was the third one, is Harkava, that these three things, they require 30 days to plant. However, Rabbi Huda disagrees. Rabbi Huda Omer, no. Kol Harkava she'ena koletes b'shlosha yamim shuv koletes. 3 days. 3 days. Halacha l'maisa, the poskim speak about this. Let's say you own chickens, and the food that you want to feed them is seeds, that if you were just to throw them out, the ground would absorb them and they would grow something. So the poskim discuss on Hilchos Shabbos, how much food are you allowed to put out for chickens that seed that might end up being planted? So the poskim say 3 days because we're concerned about Shitas Rabbi Huda. We're concerned that maybe that the seeds will be koltos or koletes within 3 days. So you have to make sure you don't give more than that amount of food. Anyways, Rabbi Huda is not our sugya for today, but he is we have now the Tanna Kama who says 30 days. Rabbi Huda holds 3 days. And now let's get to our case. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim, Shtei Shabbosos. They say that the amount of time that it takes for seeds to take root is 2 weeks. 2 Shabbos, yeah. Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua, L'divrei ha'omer shloshim, according to the one who says that it takes 30 days to plant, tzarach shloshim v'shloshim. We need to add a full set of 30 days. Why? Because just like we have Tosefes Shabbos, Tosefes Yontif, Tosefes Yom Kippur on the beginning end and on the finalized end, on the finishing end of a holiday. So we have the same thing here. So if we're concerned about 30 days, so we're not talking about Elul, we're talking about Av. You can't plant in the month of Av 60 days. The Divrei Omer Shlosha, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it takes 3 days for seeds to absorb. So then Sarach Shlosha Ushloshim, then we need 33 days. The 3 days is the amount of time it takes for the food to absorb in the ground and to take root, and the 30 days is the chumrah for the Tosefes. And the Divrei Omer Shtei Shabbosos, according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, who hold that it takes 2 weeks for things to root, then Tzarech Shtei Shabbosos Ushloshim. And these are the two cases that Rav holds like Rabbi Yossi, androgynous, like we said, in this case of Harkava, where we assume that it takes 2 weeks for foods to plant, and therefore halacha l'maisa within Rav. Okay, we don't paskin like Rav necessarily, but halacha l'maisa within Rav, then it would be that a person can only plant food up to 2 weeks before the month of Elul, because you need 30 days as a tosefes, as a chumrah, and then adding in what you think is the normal amount of time for foods to be koletes. So therefore, Rav is of the opinion that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon hold that it is 2 weeks plus 30 days, so that's 6 weeks prior to Rosh Hashanah is the last time you can plant. We had said above at the top of the page that Ushmuel Amar Bekoshi Uvekiddush. So for this, we need a little bit of thinking. What's koshi? So koshi is the blood that exists right before childbirth. It's not kama yehe kishuya. How long do we consider prior to birth that the blood that a woman sees is from Leda? So here's the background. Rashi discusses this. This is a very big machlokes rishonim between Rashi and the Rambam in regards to how we know when a woman sees blood, if that blood is menstrual blood or if the blood is dam ziva, this religious spiritual disease of becoming a zava. And here is how the Meforshim, how Rashi explains this. From the time a young woman gets her period, those first 7 days are days in which if she sees blood, she's a nida. The next 11 days, if she sees blood during those 11 days, the blood during those days is dam ziva. And then 7-11, 7-11, 7-11, until she has a baby. And then the count starts again after she gives birth. However, let's say that a woman was about to give birth. And in the 10, 11 days prior to giving birth, which were her Yemei Ziva, the days in which had she seen blood during those days, we would typically have treated her as a Zava. But before she ended up becoming a Zava Gedola, she gave birth. So how far in the past do we say, no, the blood she saw during those 11 days of Dam Ziva were not Dam Ziva? She was about to have a baby. She was in her 9th month and her body was just preparing and the cervix was slightly opening. She saw some blood. She saw blood because she's about to have a baby. So when we see the blood, when she sees the blood during the 11 days of Dam Ziva, but those 11 days are juxtaposed to the birth of the baby, how far back in time do we say, yeah, that blood's not Dam Ziva, that blood is just Dam Leda? That's a big machlokes Tanaim, 6 lines from the bottom. Rav Meir Omer, Arbaim Chamishim Yom, 40, 50 days. No, she's definitely not a Zava, for sure not. She saw blood during the last 10 days before birth. Those 10 days happened to be days that had she seen blood, she'd be a Zava. Irrelevant, just irrelevant. She's pregnant. She's about to have a baby. The bleeding, we assume, is from birth. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Daya Chodasha, just for that particular month. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Ein Kishui Yoser Mishtei Shabbosos. We don't assume that there will be blood as it relates to birth more than 2 weeks. So Shmuel says we paskin like this, Rabbi Yossi. Okay, what's the final case that Shmuel says we hold like Rabbi Yossi? That's the case of Kiddush. That's a case where we have kilayim growing. Okay, what's the case? 3 lines from the bottom. That's not. A person runs a grapevine from the vines of their grapevine from a different part of the field, but the vines can get very long, and they run it al chaver al gabe tfuas. Sorry, that's skip a line. No, al gabe tfuaso shel chavero. So I take my vine. Let's say this side of the stender is mine, and the other side of the stender is your field. I take my grapevines and I throw them out into your field over your grain, which is not allowed to be done. So says the Gemara that according to the Tanakama, Reb Meir, I ruined. In this case, the word kiddush is a bad version. It means it's sanctified in that it is now kilayim, which means that if that's your grain, I ruined your grain. I made it kilayim. And I am chayav b'achrayuso because I didn't take responsibility for my vines. And therefore, because my vines grew over into your yard, yeah, that's kilayim, but I owe you money for damages. Fine. That's Reb Meir. Reb Yosef, Reb Shimon Omrim, top of Pei Gimel Amud Beis, and we're going to go to the end of the parak, Mir Hashem. No. And this is a brilliant, sophisticated, only in halacha type of idea. Ein adam oser davar she'eino shalom. How is that possible? That if my vines are hanging over in your yard, how is it possible in lumdus that is not kilayim? They grew together, right? They are all intertwined, whatever it means to grow together. They grew 1/200th, and whatever the diyun is. Halacha says no, that doesn't work that way. I'm not allowed to forbid that which is not mine. So these are big lumdus to be had over here. This is small tosos over here. That just
your comments in someone else's yard that they don't even know.
But there you that's great. But there you have to make a kinyan. Yeah, that's ein adam chavan what's the language? And you can't put that in my yard because it's to my detriment. You can't because I don't want to be kona. But here we're not talking about kinyan. It's growing together. Mitzias, it's kilayim. It's not about kinyanim. It could be that what you're saying is true. I'm just shooting from the cuff.
How could you be authorized for something that somebody else did?
The Maisa, they grew together. They're kilayim.
But I understand, but it's not just.
You didn't do it in the first place.
So then say that I'm chayav b'achrayusa. Make me pay for it. But don't say it's not kilayim. It's kilayim.
Okay.
If you have wool and linen together, it's wool and linen together. Who cares if it grew in my yard or your yard? It's still wool and linen. So here we have kilayim. It's a masakech gefanu al gabei tuas. Okay, but it's kilayim. It's not about kinyanim. It's kilayim.
Another way to spin it.
So I'm just saying there's lumdus here. There's what to be discussed here, but we're not going to discuss it now because I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that it's a very lumdusha idea that it's possible to have kilayim grow and to say that it's not kilayim because I can't hurt I'm not allowed. That's a fascinating idea. Okay. Now we had said that Rav holds like Rav Yossi in regards to two cases. Rav holds like Rav Yossi in regards to androgynous and harkava. And we said that Shmuel holds like him in regards to two other cases of koshi and kiddush. The case of the childbirth blood prior to childbirth, and in regards to the last case of kilei akar. What about the crisscrossing of those shitas? Does Rav hold like Shmuel in the two cases that he holds like Rav Yossi? And does Shmuel hold like Rav, where Rav holds like Rav Yossi? So the Gemara says on the top line of Pei Gimel Amud Beis, Yibayalhu androgynous, Mali Amar Shmuel. What does Shmuel say in regards to androgynous? Tashmad Amar Shmuel, Rav Anan, Leisa Lebraisa, Mekame Masnisan. The Braisa is not as strong, which means that Shmuel by androgynous must therefore hold like our Mishnah. That is Lamaisa, because we saw that on the previous page. We saw that on the top of the previous page when we were trying to be done what Rav and Shmuel actually held. So that's perfect. The Gemara says, Harkava Mali Amar Shmuel. Harkava, Rav says we hold like Rav Yossi. What does Shmuel say about Harkava? Tashma, de Amar Leiv Shmuel Rav Onan. Tani Keman de Amar Shlosha Ushloshim. I disagree with him. I hold like Rav Yehuda that it only takes 3 days for seeds to take root, and therefore, when adding in Tosefes, the limitations on planting are 33 days, which is Rabbi Yehuda's shita, and not the shita of Rabbi Yossi that Rav holds like, and therefore Shmuel and Rav disagree in regards to Harkava. Koshi Mali Amar Rav, what would Rav say in regards to the parameters of how we measure the bleeding that takes place right before birth? We saw 40 and 50 days, we saw that month, and we saw Shtei Shabbosos Teku. We have seemingly no reference to Rav ever having given shiur on such a topic. Right? That's very strange. How could Rav not have given a psak on that? How could Rav not have paskened on a case of zava that happens with every woman under the sun? Everybody sees blood before they give birth. That's how a woman becomes a nida prior to birth. Okay, but either way, the Gemara says that Rav never gave shiur on that. Kiddush, Mali Amar Rav. Let's go to Shmuel's shitas, because Shmuel had said that we hold like Rav Yossi in regards to Kiddush. How does Rav hold? Amar Rav Yosef, Tashma, de Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Ein halacha ki Rav Yossi. We don't hold like Rav Yossi. Amar le'abai, my chazis to samchesaha. It's very nice that you brought this brisa that says the halacha is not like Rav Yossi, but maybe smochaha. Maybe we should quote another line of Rav that says the Amar Rav Adabar Amar Rav halacha ki Rav Yossi. So we have two brisas. Two memras, two statements of Rav, one seemingly saying we don't hold like Rav Yossi, and one seemingly saying that we do hold like him. The reason why, says the Gemara, is Amre Bei Rav Manu, who is Bei Rav? Rav Huna. For Rav Huna Amar Ein Halacha, because Rav Huna always paskins like Rav, and therefore because Rav Huna was the Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, he was a Talmud of Rav, so therefore he has all of his shitas klor, and therefore we know that Rav does not hold like Rav Huna. That Rav does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. That brings us to the end of the sugya of androgynous, and now we're going to be discussing a tumtum, as discussed a number of times, but for the sake of clarity, a tumtum is someone who at birth has a layer of skin covering over their genitalia. We don't know what gender they are. They can still urinate. There's still a urethra. There's still an opening for urine to come out of, but due to the way things are presented, it's impossible to tell. I've shared this story before. My colleague said, Mazel Tov, it's a girl, and then a couple of hours later, he said the bris is going to be next Tuesday. They looked, they thought they were wrong. They were wrong. They thought it was a girl. They weren't looking closely. And when they looked more closely and they started palpating, they saw the baby was very, very fat. It wasn't actually a tumtum. The baby was just very fat. This is a clinical thing. It's actually called concealed penis or buried penis, where you literally cannot see anything. You can't see anything that doesn't look like a boy at all. It just looks like a lot of peripubic fat. And therefore they didn't know. They called it a girl. That's incorrect. Fine. Sometimes they need surgery on those cases because if the anatomy can't protrude, they do liposuction in the peripubic fat to make sure the anatomy can protrude. They stitch down the base or whatever. Getting a little out of the scope here. So okay. So that tumtum here that we're talking about is covered with a layer of skin. Amar Avami, my avi le Rabbi Yehuda, the tumtum, the Beiri, this tumtum who lived in the city of Beiri, the Osve Abe Kursa, they sat him down on a chair, the Ikra, and they opened up whatever skin was covering, and he had 7 kids. So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't mince words. Rabbi Yehuda, Amar le chazar al bana me'ayin heim. Before you get all confident that this guy is really fertile, let's just double check the DNA test because it's not so clear that he should be fertile. Now that's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, very strong. Tanya, but the Brisa says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer tumtum lo yachlos shema yikra v'nimtzas rischama. Now we have to analyze this line. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says that a tumtum should not do chalitza. Why? Because when they open the skin to find out what his actual gender is, nimtzas rischama. Says the Gemara, atu kol de mikra zachar have. It could have been a woman. So why are you saying is this rischama? Says the Gemara, you're right, 100%. Says the Gemara, hachi ka'amar. Shema Yikra v'nimtzah nekeva, in which case, of course, she can't do chalitza to somebody else. She's a she. You have to be a he to do chalitza. So if it's a woman, for sure, there's no chalitza. And v'afilu nimtzah zachar shema yimtzah rischam. So my benai, what's the difference in Rabbi Yehuda, who is very stark that this person cannot have children, and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says that it might be a man, it might be a woman. Amar Rava, the difference would be how we view the tumtum legabe lifsol b'makom achen. Let's say that one of the brothers was a tumtum. For Yibum purposes. So Ruvain died. Shimon is a tumtum. Levi and Yehuda are regular healthy brothers. So what do we say about that? Would be the difference between these two shitas. Rabbi Yehuda won't even hear of it. Nothing. He's a zero. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is willing to entertain it. Might be a boy. And says the Gemara as well. Would there be chalitza when there is only him? If he's the only brother, if he's the only yavam, is this person who's a tumtum? Those are the cases that are ika beinai. So we had mentioned the case of Bia B'Shtei Makomos in regards to androgynous, that it could be that there is skila if a man were to be intimate with an androgynous, either B'tzad Nakvus, with the female genitalia, or Me'achora, to have Tashma Shemita Bia Shelo Kedarka. So let's get back into this sugya. We're halfway down on Pig Yom Lamed Beis. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar Abba, Achva de Rav Yehuda Bar Zavda, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Okay, this went for many generations. And basically the source of all of this was a shiur from Rav. Androgynous, chayavin alav skila mishtei makomos. Chayav skila if a man is intimate with an androgynous in either place, either b'tzad nakvus shelo or bia shelo kedarka. Says the Gemara, not so simple. Meisvei, the Brisa writes in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Amar androgynous chayavin alav skila kezachar. No, that's not true. If they, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if there's bia b'tzad nakvus, but that's not skila. It's aser, but it's not skila. The only time that there is an iser of skila, says Rabbi Eliezer, is when it's skila kizachar, how two men would be intimate, which is bia shelo kedarka. And says the Gemara, b'med dvar mamur b'zachrus shelo. That's only with bia shelo kedarka. Aval b'nakvus shelo. But for the female genitalia of this androgynous pater, that would not be a chiv skila. Says the Gemara, how do we answer this seeming contradiction? We have the statement of Rav that says Shtei Mekomos. We have Rabbi Eliezer who says, no, it's only Skila Kizachar. The Gemara says, Huda Amar Ki Aitana. Rav, who says that an androgynous is Chayav and Al Skila B'Shtei Mekomos, that's Ki Aitana Detanya. Rav Simoy Omer, androgynous Chayav and Al Skila B'Shtei Mekomos. So Rav was really paskening a shayla. There's a machlokas Rav Simoy and Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Simoy was of the opinion that a man who is intimate with an androgynous, either b'tzad nakvus or b'tzad zachrus, the halachas are chayav skila. Rabbi Eliezer says no, only kizachar. Only if a man is intimate with an androgynous b'tzad zachrus shelo, b'ya shelo kedarka. So that's when they'd be chayav skila. So that's the machlokas. My time at Rav Simoy. And if you want to talk about a way to misunderstand a pasuk and chumash, please pay attention, because we never would have thought that this was shot in the pasuk without this Gemara. Says the Gemara, my time at Rav Simoy. Why does Rav Simoy hold that if a man sleeps with an androgynous, b'tzad nakvus and b'tzad zachros, that you be chayav skila? Says the Gemara, state in chumash. This is not even complicated. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Baramduri Asber, I'll explain. It was explained to me. V'es zachar lo sishkav mishkevei isha. A man should not lie with the sleepings of a woman. Ezehu zachar sheyesh bo shnei mishkavos. Who is a man who has the possibility for two forms of tashma shamita be omer's androgynous? The pasuk in Chumash is not talking about routine homosexuality between one physically normal male and another physically normal male. That's not what the pasuk is talking about. It's mishkevei isha in the plural. The pasuk is talking about an androgynous. Unbelievable. And it's right there. It's mishkevei. Why didn't it say mishkavisha? It's right there. It's just black on white. It's so clear what's happening. V'Rabbanan. how then could anyone learn the psukim otherwise? If mishkave is plural, and therefore the skila of tashmish amita must be with someone who has both tzad nakbus and tzad zachus. So then how can it be that anyone learns otherwise? You're right. The word mishkave is there. It teaches us that the pasuk speaking about someone who has two different orifices for tashmit, but it's still es zachar. See, the pasuk still says zachar. So then, if you look back at the pasuk, there's two layers. Es zachar. That's how we know that a man cannot sleep with another man. Lo sishkav mishkave isha. That's how we know that a man cannot sleep with an androgynous, either b'tzad nakbus shabo or b'tzad zachar shabo. V'rabbanan zachar greda minalahu. How do you know the other shita? How would they know that a man alone is allowed to do that? This is actually a girsa issue. It should be mi es, because the pasuk says es zachar, ve'es zachar lo sishkav mishkave isha. The word es teaches us, according to the shita of Rav Simoy, that it's talking about a man. Bisha shelo kadarka minalahu. How do we know that if a man is intimate with a woman shelo kadarka, that that's also called tashmish amita? Mi ve'es. It should be from the beginning of that pasuk ve'es. So the vav is darshan, the word es is darshan, the word zachar is darshan, the word mishkave is darshan. Amar Rav Shezi, Amar Rav Chizda, lo lekol Amar Rabbi Eliezer and Jorgen zachar ma'alyu. Not everyone agrees that an androgynous is a zachar ma'alya, that is a male across the board. Not everybody agrees. How do we know? Shima ta'omer kain, had you said that b'mukdashin yikadesh, then there should have been a case scenario with certain animals that they should have been sanctified, but it's not the case. What is this talking about? Says the Gemara, minolan de lo kidesh, because the Tana Rabbanan, if you have a chicken, we're talking about birds now. If you have a chicken hanirba, one who had tashmish amita with this animal, v'hamukza, one that was set aside, v'hanebad, a chicken that served avodah zarah, v'esnan, a chicken that was given to a woman for prostitution, umechir, a chicken that was swapped out for a dog, v'tumtum androgynous, according to the Tanakama, v'tamin begadim beis hablia. It's a unique din that really only applies by birds. Normally, when we touch something, it makes us tummy, but by chickens, by oath, that when we swallow it, it makes our clothes tummy, only by achila, but not by the touching. So it says the Gemara, the Tanakama says that all of these scenarios, inclusive of tumtum and androgynous, cause this for tuma. But Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no, tumtum and androgynous, that's not correct. These two cases are excluded. They're not treated as normal tuma issues for the birds. When the pasuk in Chumash distinguishes between the genders of an animal, that's when you remove them. But by the way, interesting that the Chumash doesn't distinguish between the genders of birds. And therefore all of them are treated. It's not the case. We know that some of them have eggs and some of them don't. That's why the eggs that we eat are unfertilized eggs, because they're all female. And the whole lighting system to make them ovulate more quickly, to pump out the eggs, great. But there's none of them ever have chicks in them. I was given as a gift. I met this midwife in the middle of Wisconsin. She was going to refer me to all of her people. Great. She sent me home with 2 things of raw eggs, every last one of them filled with blood. Every last one of them. She gave me 2 dozen. Every one of them had blood in them. Why? Because there weren't only female chicks, there were growing chicks inside of them, which halachically speaking, if there's no blood at this phase, it's mutter, it's not flesh, but it's still problematic. Still, obviously we don't, so I just do it all. And they're all different colors too. Okay, so the Gemara says that in regards to birds, and therefore what we can see from here that it's really, tumtum and androgynous is not really treated as a zachar proper. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, we learned this already. Afana nami tanina, we learned this idea before. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, hakilayim v'treifa b'yotzei dofen tumtum androgynous lo kiddushin below mekadshin. That these types of foods, kilayim and a treifa that's yotzei dofen, a tumtum androgynous lo kiddushin below mekadshin. What is this talking about? Amar Shmuel lo kiddushin b'tmura below mekadshin be'oset tmura. In regards to swapping out the quality and cost, or halachic cost, I should say. Really just halacha, the status of kedusha in regards to tamura. So these things don't apply to tumtum and androgynous because they're not the routine shmamina. Last little sugya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer chayav and alav skila kazachar Tanya Amar Rebbe. Sorry, blanked for a second there. Amar Shalach lilu Torah etzel Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua. When Rebbe went to go learn halacha by Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua, Chibru alav talmidav, all of the students came around him. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua's talmidim came around Rebbe, kitarnagolim shel beis bukya, like the tarnagolim in the place of beis bukya. Rashi, toward the end of the parak, last one before the end of the parak, shel beis bukya, bekim v'charifin, vein manichin tarnagol nachri benem, super stark. They would not allow the tarnagolis, a tarnagol who was a nachri, which came from a nachri, to hang out with them. So like the tarnagolim of beis bukya, These were the Talmidim of Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua treating Rebbe this way. We have to make sure you're the right person. And says the Gemara, part of the welcome test was to make sure that they all taught me one sugya. That is a warm entry into this discussion of this base medrash. This is a big shy there. What's going on here? It's Rebbe. So he was younger, they weren't sure what his motivations are. So there's a Mefarshim discuss a whole bunch of different things here, but that is why they kept teaching him this one Mishnah, Rabbi Lezer Omer, Androgenes Chayav and Skila Kazachar. Hadron Allah Hara Baruch Hashem, we finished another parak. The Ratzim should join together again in 7.5 years to learn this yet again. Wishing you all a beautiful night.